Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. Before the outbreak of World War I, Germany was under the rule of the German Empire, under the near-absolute rule of the Kaiser, or Emperor. But by the end of the war, Germany's war effort, as well as its monarchy, collapsed, as the country was placed under the Weimar Republic, whose ineffective government paved the way for the rise of dehydrations. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, the German Empire survived? But before we can even come close to answering that, we first need to understand what the German Empire even really was, and why it was overthrown. The German Empire first came into being in 1871 after being unified by Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Prior to this, Germany was just a patchwork of numerous different states, until, in the mid-1800s, the Kingdom of Prussia waged a series of wars to bring all of those states, except Austria, under its whim, uniting them all under the German Empire. However, Germany didn't just have one monarch ruling over it, it had several. Germany was made up of several different kingdoms, such as Bavaria, Saxony, Württemberg, and several other smaller states, each with their own king, which just paid fealty to the German Emperor. And since Prussia was the most powerful, as well as the one that unified Germany, the King of Prussia would act as German Emperor as well, with the two titles being constitutionally bound. Remember that. It's important later. Anyways, fast forward 47 years, and Germany is under the rule of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the third Prussian German Emperor. Oh, and Europe is on fire too. For 4 years, Europe had been stuck in the brutal slog of World War I, which saw both sides locked in a bloody stalemate, seeing high casualties with practically nothing to show for it. And since Germany had been blockaded by Britain, preventing them from importing goods, this forced Germany to devote pretty much its entire economy to the war effort, as the country essentially came under a military dictatorship under the Military High Command, or OHL, with Wilhelm II just acting as a figurehead. But this also meant that, since much of the country's food supply was being sent over to the front, and since they couldn't import any, the German people were left starving as food shortages were widespread across the country. So, needless to say, as the people were suffering and the war wasn't even going anywhere, people were starting to get fed up with the military regime and with the Kaiser, who, to them, was the face of the regime that had forced them into this position. And things only got worse when, in mid-1918, as American troops arrived, the front line collapsed as the Germans were forced to retreat and the OHL realized that the war was lost. And so, after a few months, in October, the government decided to request a ceasefire with the United States, which went something like this. Hey, do you think we could make peace? Things ain't going so great for us. We only negotiate with democratic countries. Get back to me when you're democratic. Sure, fine. So, not really being able to do much, and also seeing that, if they were to give control of the country over to the liberals, then they would be to blame for whatever terms Germany was forced to accept, the constitution was reformed as Germany was changed into a constitutional monarchy, with the Kaiser's authority being limited by the Reichstag, the German parliament. Hey, look, Wilson, we're a democracy now. Can we have a ceasefire now? When did I say that was all you needed for a ceasefire? You need to get rid of that Kaiser guy. Then we can talk. What? But sure, fine, whatever. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, the people were still starving and were still fed up that the war wasn't over yet. And after an admiral disobeyed orders, attempting to order sailors into a pointless and suicidal battle, the sailors rebelled, sparking a communist uprising in what would eventually become the German Revolution, as people demanded an end to the war and the abdication of the Kaiser, and formed communist states within Germany. And so, now, the goal was to manage to get Wilhelm II to abdicate. But notably, the government didn't actually want to abolish the monarchy. Instead, the Chancellor, Max von Baden, came up with a plan to keep the constitutional monarchy in place, but simply replace Wilhelm II with one of his sons as a regent, as the country remained in the hands of the liberal government. Wilhelm, though, wasn't sure about what he wanted to do. Having lost the support of, well, everyone, including the military, he could tell that there was no way he'd be able to keep his imperial throne. However, though Wilhelm was fine with abdicating the imperial throne, he wanted to keep the Prussian one. But, as I explained earlier, that was not possible. And so when Baden asked Wilhelm to abdicate in the beginning of November 1918, Wilhelm refused, dragging his feet on it. And while Wilhelm was delaying, the revolution ended up spreading all the way to Berlin as the situation became much more urgent, with the government fearing that the revolutionaries might overthrow them and form a national communist government. And so, after one last failed attempt to convince Wilhelm to abdicate, Baden just decided, screw it, and just told everyone he had abdicated when he really hadn't, before handing the chancellorship unconstitutionally to a man named Friedrich Ebert. But at this point, it was too little too late, and after learning that one of the leaders of the communist revolt, Karl Liebknecht, was about to proclaim a socialist republic, a member of the ruling government named Philipp Scheidemann, against the wishes of the government, decided to proclaim Germany a republic. And though the liberals didn't want to do this, what was done, and the German Empire was gone. And even though Wilhelm didn't initially consent to this, after a few weeks he would formally abdicate the throne as Germany's centuries-long tradition of monarchy came to an end. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, the German monarchy had survived? There's a few ways that this could be done, but the best way would be for Wilhelm to just stop being a goof and abdicate earlier on before the revolution spread to Berlin. So, in this alternate timeline, Wilhelm abdicates much earlier on, never delaying like he did in our timeline. And so, with Wilhelm gone, Baden is able to proceed with his plan. Before the revolution screwed everything up, Baden had wanted to appoint Wilhelm's second son, Prince Eitel Friedrich, as regent while the whole situation could be sorted out. And now that there's nothing to get in his way, Baden proceeds with that plan as Ebert once again becomes chancellor. And with Wilhelm having abdicated earlier in this timeline, this would quell the situation in Berlin before it can get out of hand, as Germany is never proclaimed as a republic. However, communist insurgents continue to fight against the government, much like in our timeline, with the Spartacist uprising this time primarily focusing on securing the abolition of the monarchy. But not wanting to risk losing the support of the middle and upper classes in Germany, the government crushes the uprising, once again securing control of the government for the Social Democrats. But then there's the question of, now what? In our timeline, the Democratic Imperial Constitution had some lingering questions involved, such as the Emperor's involvement in appointing the Chancellor, and so, after the Social Democrats consolidate their government, it's very likely that they'd once again revise the Constitution, likely forming something similar to the Weimar Constitution of our timeline, though with further restraints on the Emperor, giving more power to a democratic Chancellor. And so, just like that, the German Empire, sort of, manages to come out intact as the German monarchy remains in place, with Prince Eitel Friedrich being crowned as Kaiser Frederick IV, with Friedrich Ebert as his chancellor. And after that, things largely continue as they had in our timeline. Germany is once again forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which cedes large amounts of territory, shrinks the military, and destroys the German economy and spirit. And so, once again, the German people are left under an unpopular democratic regime with a strong desire to rebuild Germany. Among such nationalists, unlike in our timeline, with the Kaiser still on the throne, it's much more likely that monarchism would remain a dominant force among many German nationalists. In our timeline, the primary reason why a restoration of the German monarchy never succeeded was because it was just that. A restoration of a defunct institution. But this time, the Kaiser is still in place as the national figure that nationalists would rally behind, and remembering the power that Germany had before the war, those seeking to return to that would likely rally behind the Kaiser, pushing for his return to the near absolute rule that he had formerly held. And plus, in our timeline, Eitel Friedrich was already associated with monarchist groups in Germany, so in this timeline, having the reigning Kaiser's support would give the monarchists much more legitimacy among many German conservatives, as many begin a genuine push for the restoration of the Kaiser's authority. So, as Germany continues to be racked by the effects of the aftermath of the war, it's very possible that, with the continued failures of the liberal government, the conservatives and nationalists would be able to take power and enact the restoration of the Kaiser's authority. And though it's also fairly possible that they aren't able to, if they failed, then the world would basically just end up the same as it did in our timeline. So I'm gonna explore what would happen if the Kaiser is brought back to his authority. So, once Frederick is restored to his essentially absolute power, Germany would, once again, seek to restore its place in Europe, undo the Treaty of Versailles, and retake its former territory. Now, a restoration like this would certainly see pushback from the West, who would protest at the elevation of power of the German monarchy, fearing another war. But not wanting to start anything, and not really being able to do anything, they allow it. Anyways, with Frederick in total power, he would also likely begin to seek the return of his father, Wilhelm, to Germany in order to act as an advisor as well. This, again, would spark outrage in the West, who wouldn't do anything. When it comes to the economy, assuming that Germany had already enacted the Dawes Plan prior to Frederick's restoration, the economy would be largely fine up until the Great Depression. After the Depression hits, Germany would see widespread protests and backlash against Frederick's reign, potentially seeing a communist revolt, but with the military actually on the Kaiser's side this time, the revolt would be crushed as Frederick secures his reign. Meanwhile, though Frederick would likely push for an Anschluss with Austria, with Germany under Prussian monarchist leadership, it's fairly unlikely that this would pan out, as neither the Austrian Catholics nor Austrian deities would support the German state. So instead, Austria would likely remain in the Italian sphere of influence. And speaking of Italy, with the high tensions that both of them had towards the West, and without the ideological tensions between Italian dehydrations, Germany and Italy would once again likely become allies alongside Austria. And not being able, and not really wanting to expand south, Germany would focus its expansion efforts in the north primarily in Poland. And so, in time, it's fairly likely that Germany would once again launch an invasion of Poland, sparking World War II just as it had in our timeline. However, with a different regime in power, it's unclear just how much this would change Germany's war effort, for better or for worse. But, as the German Empire rises once again to its place of military prominence in Europe, another great war breaks out between the powers of Europe. But time will only tell if, this time, the Kaiser and his army will be able to see victory. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. But that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.